Morning, Aishwarya. So now, students, we will enter into this an important topic on registration. This topic, students, is an important topic for your final examination, and therefore, students, you will find again here calls a typical case of presenting your answers pretty well. The two things, the biggest challenge of the students, as far as the topic is concerned, is just that there are a lot of points wherein they get really confused in terms of the applicability of the small provisions which are there, more so in the limits part. And then there are a lot of exemption which are particular to a particular supply. So therefore, to consolidate all and to remember it becomes a task for the student. So therefore, in this topic, student, the two set of objective is to remember the provisions properly, and the second one primarily is to present your answer very well. Because the same sort of challenge will happen, students, over here also, and which is that you might not be in a position to answer it well, and therefore, even though you may know the answer, you will not be getting the marks which it deserves. That is fine, Ashwara, right now. So let's start, students, on the registration part. Students, first and foremost, I'll give you one statement which you just take a note of it and the topic. Give the heading in your topic, registration, in your notebook. And once you have put across this name, registration, thereafter, students, write a particular statement in this context. The statement is: a registered person, this is RP, is always a taxable person, which is TP. But a taxable person is registered person only after he takes the registration. Only after he takes registration. Okay, after that, there are two sentence, students, which are very important. And what is that? So, a taxable person, always bear it in mind in GST. And the taxable person, students, is liable to pay GST on output supply. OS is the output supply. And students, you should know a registered person, the last topic of payment of tax, when I was teaching you this e-cash ledger and all, at that point of time also this particular statement I have put across with all of you. And a registered person, students, is only entitled to take always bear this statement in mind. This is a very important statement, students, in the context of the things. Very important statement. A registered person is only entitled to take the ITC. Do you all agree to this one or not? Now, who is a taxable person, student, in this context? Taxable person is a person who is liable to get himself registered. So, any person who is liable to get himself registered, that person would be considered to be a taxable person in this context. Now, the chances are very high that he will take a registration, and only after he takes the registration that he will be considered as a registered person. But if he has not taken the registration, that does not mean that he will not be making the payment of the liability. He will continue to be liable for the payment of the GST on the output supply because he is a taxable person. even though he may not have taken the registration. Okay, but what about the ITC part? Can a taxable person who is not yet registered, can a taxable person who is not yet registered, can he take the ITC? And the answer is no. That taxable person cannot take the ITC. So to take the ITC, he need to get himself registered, student. He need to get himself registered. Fine. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, one important particular diagram, students, I'm just going to make at the very outset for all of you, at the very outset, which you need to take a note of it. Which you need to take a note of it, students. The first and the foremost, students, first let's try to understand what is the effective date. The first particular note or a diagram that you're going to make would be what is the effective date of registration. From which date you will be considered as a registered person. Effective date of registration. So this is a diagram that you will have to take it into account, students. Effective date of registration. Now there are two types of person. One is a person liable for registration, which is a taxable person, and a person who is not liable for registration. Person who is liable for registration. And liable for registration would be under two sections. One is Kavita, good morning. Liable for registration, students, is under two sections. Section is 22 or the second section is 24. So person is liable for registration either under section 22, and that 22 is about the turnover base registration. Once you cross the threshold limit of the turnover, then you become liable for registration. That is under section 22. And there is another section 24 which talks about the compulsory registration, students. 24 talks about what? The compulsory registration. I hope it all of you are clear with this one. So here we don't see the turnover. In those cases of section 24, you are supposed to be compulsorily be registered student in this context. So therefore, a person who is liable for registration, or the second one, students, is a person who is not liable. Person who is not liable for registration, which means that he wants to take what? He wants to take voluntary registration. He wants to take a voluntary registration. This is a case of a voluntary registration when a person is not liable for registration. You all get this one, students? Now, if a person is liable for registration, again the two things can happen. Which are the two things? You can see he takes the registration. Yes, voluntary registration. He takes the registration. And the second one, students, is that he does not take the registration. So in one case he is taking the registration, in other case he is not taking the registration, students. Be careful on this one. In case he is taking the registration, students, in this case what will happen? Now there are again two things. That is the loop which is getting created, and that is the reason it very, and this diagram will be beneficial for all the students. If he is taking the registration, you need to ask question, did he took registration within 30 days? Within 30 days of the relevant date, or after 30 days of relevant date? What is relevant date? We'll see. After 30 days of relevant date. Now, if he is taking the registration within 30 days of the relevant date, students, in that particular case, can you see this effective date of registration will be what? Is backdated. Backdated means, it means not the date when the registration was granted, but the date when he became liable for registration. So the backdated will be in this context, students, backdated, that is when he became liable for registration. That is when he became a taxable person. Because that is the definition of taxable person, students. That is the definition of taxable person. And what is the significance of this one, students? Significance of this one is that ITC can be claimed backdated, students. You can claim a backdated ITC because your registration becomes effective from that day. From that back date, you will be considered as a registered person. And because you are considered as a registered person from that back date, therefore, students, in that particular context, what we are going to say that you can avail the ITC from that back date. From that back date, you will be eligible to take the ITC. And what if he registered himself after 30 days, students? Then what happens? Then in this particular context, students, effective date is prospective. Effective date, students, in this case is prospective. And prospective, students, which means that the date of registration will become the date of registration will be considered. And from this date, when you have taken the registration, you will be considered as a registered person. And only from this date, the ITC can be taken. Is that point clear to all of you? Now, if it does not take registration, students, then what does it imply? It will imply this that here you are liable. In the second particular chart, students, what does it imply over here? It means that you are liable, but you have not taken the registration. So how it will be found out, students? It will be found out by the department. Very soon, the department is going to find out, students, that through search, investigation, or inspection, the department is going to find out that you were a taxable person, you were required to get yourself registered, but you have not got registered. Now, therefore, what happens, students, in this case? This particular part, students, what will happen in this case? The detection will be done by the proper officer. The detection of your case will be done by whom? By the proper officer, students. And then, after the detection, students, you will be required to get yourself registered. Now, the effective date on this particular context, effective date of registration will be what? The date of temporary, students, underline the word temporary, registration order passed by the proper officer. The effective date, students, in this case would be date of temporary registration order which is passed by the proper officer, students. So therefore, the proper officer, once he has detected your case, he will pass a temporary registration order, and that date becomes your effective date, from which date you will be in a position to avail the ITC. Is that point clear to all of you, students? Have you all copied on this one? And the last one, students, that you can see is about when it is a case of a person who is not liable for registration, which is the case of a voluntary registration. And for voluntary registration, students, the effective date is the date of registration itself. Is the date of registration. Is that point clear to all of you? The date of registration itself. I hope that every one of you are clear with this one. The significance of being a registered person is also now known to you. And now you can also distinguish between what is the difference between a taxable person versus a registered person. So a taxable person need not necessarily be a registered person, because unless you take a registration, such taxable person cannot be considered as a registered person. Unless you take a registration, such taxable person cannot be considered to be a registered person, isn't it? And that exactly the point. That exactly is the point, friends. Now, with that, friends, let's read this particular theory which is there for us in your notes, which I have been given you. As I told you, friends, the theoretical part is very confusing after some point of time, because there are a lot of limits which plays out in this topic. That is one part of your understanding on this topic, and the second part is the presentation part. So we have to attack these two aspects so far as the topic is concerned. and only then we can say that we have negotiated this topic well. Let's start with this one first now. My, I will be endeavoring to complete the topic today itself. Huh? Right now, in this one session itself, we'll try to finish it off now. So all these topics now, all because these are all small topics, students. Like the other topics which were having a lot of parts and parcel, these topics will not take much of time. Now, students, nature of registration, if you see, let's read this one out. The registration in GST is PAN based and state specific. One registration per state or union territory. Obviously, because you have to pay the SGST, and that SGST you have to pay for that particular state government. So, therefore, though it is a PAN based registration, but you will have to take registration state wise. So, if you've got more than one place of business, if you have got more than one place of business, students, then you will have to take that much number of registration. So you will have that much number of GSTIN. How about all of you clear with this one? However, a business entity having a separate place of business means in a single state, may obtain means it is not compulsory. It is voluntary. We already knew that if you've got more than one place of business in the same state or union territory, then you can take only one registration. You are required only to take only one registration. But if you want to take more than one registration, definitely you can do that. So he may obtain separate registration for each of its place of business. That is what he can do. The GST identification number called GSTIN, a 15-digit number and a certificate of registration incorporating therein, this GSTIN is made available to the applicant on the GSTN common portal. Obviously, we know that. Registration under GST is not tax specific. Means it is not about the fact that if I have to pay IGST, I have to take separate registration, or I have to pay CGST, I'll have to take separate registration. No, it is not tax specific registration, it is a state specific registration. Always be very clear on this one. These are the MCQ points. Okay, so single registration for all the taxes, that is CGST, SGST, UTGST, IGST. If you have got more than one state, you will accordingly will take more than one registration in this context. Now, students, over here, person liable for registration in this context. Now, students, this particular part which has been there for all of you is all about section number 22. In mark, if you have got hard copy, section number 22. So, section number 22, students, in this particular context, now this is 22.1, this is 22.3, and this is 22.4. These are various clauses. Now, this, students, I'll give you a statement. Refer notebook. I'll give you a table on that. This is very important because here lies where the confusion is. Students get confused on this particular application. So this I'll give a statement in your notebook so you can take a note of it. Let's do the 3 and 4 first. Over here, students. In the case of transfer of, so here, students, supposing, students, a registered person, RP, registered person, in this case, what he does transfer of business. Students, a registered person is doing what? A transfer of business. This is the point. So if a registered person, students, is doing a transfer of business, then that transfer, students, of business is on account of succession, sale or succession, students, in this context. Then, students, the transferee is liable to be registered from the date. So liability for registration, the transferee will become a taxable person, students. Liable to be registered means he becomes a taxable person. From which date he becomes taxable person? Date of succession of business. Date of succession of business, students. Or if you remember, students, I gave you just now in your chart 30 days time limit. The 30 days time limit. Now the 30 days time limit would be considered from this date. On whom? On the transferee. So if the transferee students, if he makes an application within 30 days from this date, which date? The date of succession. Then in that case, whenever that transferee is registered, that registration will go backdated. Which backdated? This date, the date of succession. But if he makes an application after 30 days from this date, then the registration will take effect from the date when the registration was granted. When the registration was granted. So this date, students, is a key date. 30 days will be considered from this date. Is that point clear to all of you? And if you talk about 22(4), in the case of amalgamation demerger by an order of the High Court, then the transferee means the amalgamated company or the resulting company, is liable to be registered from the date of which this is a date. So which date? The date on which registrar of the companies issue certificate of incorporation, students. When the registrar of the company is issuing the certificate of registration. So what we can say, if the registration application, RA, students, is a registration application. If the registration application is made within 30 days, 30 days of what? Of certificate of incorporation, COI, certificate of incorporation, then the effective date of registration will be the date of COI, will be the date of COI, students. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, students, this statement is a very important statement. Now you will learn, students, that the first part 22 I have left it, na? Turnover based threshold for the purpose of obtaining the registration. This point I have left it. So this point is what I'm now going to touch upon. For that turnover, students, you will require the concept of the aggregate turnover, students. Here the aggregate turnover, if it crosses a particular limit, if a aggregate turnover is crossing a particular limit, then you will be liable for registration. So what is that aggregate turnover? The term aggregate turnover, students, see the equation. All of you, everyone will see the equation of the term aggregate turnover. So you will take all the supplies to determine the aggregate turnover, students. You will take all the supplies, whether it is a taxable supply, or it is an exempt supply, or it is an export, or it is an interstate supply, doesn't matter. You will take, students, what? All the supplies, so as to determine the aggregate turnover, students. And that you will do for pan India basis. Pan India basis means if you have got more than one place of business in the other state, so all the turnover of the state, students, all the turnover of the state students will be considered over here. In this context, fine students, I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Now, in this particular context, students, if you see very carefully, there are two things, students, which you always keep in mind. The exclusion, students, which you should always keep in mind in the aggregate turnover concept. In this particular context, students, which are those two exclusion, students? This is the two. First one, students, be careful. I told you already in my initial class. I don't know whether you remember this or not. In the initial class itself, I have told you about this particular point. And what was that? If supposing, students, a transaction is not a supply. If a transaction is not a supply, then whether you are going to consider that transaction in determining your aggregate turnover, in determining the aggregate turnover, students, that the answer is no. So that the answer is no, students. Therefore, exclusion will be transaction which is not a supply will not be a part of. Exclusion means, what does exclusion would mean? Exclusion means not a part of the aggregate turnover. Not a part of the aggregate turnover, students. That exactly the point. Now the second particular point, students, if you see over here, is about the fact that the RCM, that RCM case, the transaction in which you are liable to pay the tax under the RCM, that is a purchase transaction, no, students? So whether the purchase transaction in which you are liable to pay under the RCM, whether you will consider this as a part of your aggregate turnover, and the answer is no, because it is someone else's turnover in which you are made liable to pay the GST. It is not your turnover. So the RCM particular turnover will be excluded. So RCM transaction will be excluded, students. So don't consider that as a part of your aggregate turnover. These are the very important things because you will have to end up doing the calculations and all. So you cannot make mistakes in this regard. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Every one of you. That exactly the point. That exactly the point, students. Don't make mistakes, students. Practicals are going to follow now. Everything. Export, that is what I said. Na? It is an export. Zero rated exports and all. In every particular context, students, this will be required to be registered. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. Every one of you. Let's proceed further, students, now. Now, all of you students, now the point, this is the most important statement that we are going to now prepare. And what is that? 22.1. The turnover based. The turnover based threshold. What is the limit? I told you about the same. So export will include all SEZ export or your zero rated export. Everything comes over here. Everything, but excluding these two items. This will not be a part of your aggregate turnover for the purpose of determining the threshold where you are deciding whether you are liable to pay the GST or not. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. So now then, get ready, students. In this context, GST 20 to 1. Give the step 20 to 1. GST registration limit. That is the turnover based criteria. Turnover based criteria for registration. So what is that particular turnover based criteria for registration, students? So over here, for the goods and for the services, there are two separate limit which is under play. Now friends, over here the first one is that four special category states in this context. Which is that four special category state? Mistip, mistrip, manag, Kavita, ye NMMT, you can say that. Yeah, misman, whatever you want to, you have to do it. But don't use this N double MT because then there is Meghalaya, Manipur, Maharashtra. Lot of states are there in M, na? Whatever suits you. At the end of the day, students, whatever suits you. So, whatever suits the way you can remember it. At the end of the day, what is the relevance? The way mistrip, man nag, or misman, trip nag. Whatever you suits you. So, this is Mizoram, Tripura, Manipur, and Nagaland. So here, students, as you know, for goods and services, it is 10 lakhs limit is the case in this context. Now, so the second is very important over here. Here it is about the case of yeah. Second, students, is about yeah, Kavita. To see this is in Punjabi that people say to see putter, to see make putter. So T over here, although I'm not a Punjabi, but this is how they pronounce it. So this is Telangana. Okay, this is Uttarakhand. This C, students, this is one. To C, that's Sikkim. U is Uttarakhand. Meg is your Meghalaya. Ud is your Puducherry. And AR is your Arunachal Pradesh. Okay, to C, Meg Pudar. Okay, to C, Meg Pudar, that is 20 lakh students in this context. 20 lakhs in this context, students. Be careful on this one. And the last one, students, the three big SCS, special category state, and other parts of India. Other parts of India. You say, sir, but what is the three big SCS? To know which are three big special category state, students? In this case, one is a J&K, another is Assam, and third one is Himachal Pradesh. Obviously, there are many industries who are there in this particular area, especially the factories and all, isn't it? Or there are a lot of factories in this particular context, students. That's the reason why here, students, the limit is enhanced to 40 lakhs is also being given to them. But the services, students, service state, these are not service state. Because that they are not a service state, students, the limit is 20 lakhs. The same lower limit of 20 lakhs is what has been kept for them. But here, like Himachal Pradesh and all, students, manufactured in Himachal Pradesh. But the Solan, you may have heard of it. So there is a lot of manufacturing facility, and that is the reason why the limit of registration is enhanced to 40 lakhs. So only when a person crosses the threshold of 40 lakhs in these states, three big SCS, which are they, JNK, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and uh, Himachal Pradesh, and all the remaining parts of India. For them, if they are supplying the goods, the turnover base registration will be will be effective when they cross the aggregate turnover of 40. When they cross the aggregate turnover of 40 lakhs. Is that point clear to all of you, students? Now here, students, you are going to put an asterisk mark. Here you are going to put an asterisk mark and do try to take a note over here, students. This 40 lakhs enhanced limit. Students, if it is possible, enhanced limit is by virtue of notification number 10/2019. Try to remember this notification number, students, if it is possible. Next, students, you will write the enhanced limit of 40 lakhs will not apply in the following case. Which are those cases, students? First is where the supplier does not exclusively supply the goods. If he is not exclusively supplying the goods, students, then that enhanced limit of 40 lakhs will not be made applicable. That is the point. So it means that the question, if they give it to you in this way, that he is a supplier of goods as well as service. He is a supplier of goods as well as service. So in that particular case, students, the limit that would be applicable to him would be 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, as the case may be. Why 10 lakhs? If he is in that 4 SCS, if he is in that 4 SCS, then the 10 lakhs limit is applicable. Or other than that 4, it will be only 20 lakhs. So that enhanced limit of 40 lakhs will not be applicable if he is not an exclusive supplier of the goods. That is point number one. The second point, students, is that in this regard, if he is engaged in the supply of goods, namely what? Tobacco product, ice cream, pan masala, and brick and tile. And brick and tile. And the last one, students, which has been there over here is monetary exemption under section 23(2). We will see monetary exemption students. We are now going to see the limit shall be the reduced limit. What is the reduced limit? That is rupees 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, as the case the limit shall be the reduced limit, that is rupees 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, as the case. Is that point clear to all of you? Now, what is that monetary exemption under 23(2) that we are going to see now very soon? Don't worry about it. Have you all done with this, students, or not? All of you. Not here, Ashwin. I think, yeah, yeah. Aerated water is also there. Have you all copied on this one, students? Every one of you? So over here in these three cases, the enhanced limit of 40 lakh students is not available. In these three cases, the enhanced limit of 40 lakhs will not be made applicable. Only the 20 lakhs limit is what needs to be considered. You will be looking into the questions. You will see for yourself that how this plays out. How this plays out, students. Is that clear to all of you? With that, now, students, let's proceed further. Once you're through with this one, now comes to the next particular part of your story, and this is about the compulsory registration, students. Can you see that? And this compulsory registration is under section 24. This compulsory registration is under section 24. Just go through it once, students. Just go through this particular the person who are compulsory required. Very important references, because you have to remember all these things, students. You cannot say that it's only read-only provision. Yeah, there are read-only provision which will be considered as a homework, or if it is only read-only provision. But these are not a read-only provision, these are remember-only provision. So you need to remember these things. There's a technique to remember it that I'll tell you, but just first go through it once quickly. All of you. Ready, students? Sure. So students, over here, if you all will see in this context, let us see that person making any interstate supply. Students, as you know, I make I may be doing, say for example, students, I am doing only interstate supply, and my total turnover is only 2 lakh rupees. Am I obligated to obtain the registration in that particular case? But the answer is yes. Even if my aggregate turnover is 2 lakh rupees. The reason is I have done the interstate sale. That situation, irrespective of the aggregate turnover, I would be required to obtain the registration. Point number one. The second one, if you see, is about the fact that is about a casual taxable person in the green. You see, so we will go row wise. The casual taxable person who does not have a fixed place of business in the state or union territory from where he wants to make a supply. You know the casual taxable person. We already have made a reference earlier also. So supposingly I am registered in Mumbai. For some reason I've got a batch, say for example in Hyderabad. I'm going to Hyderabad to take up a batch. Now when I'm going to Hyderabad for the purpose of taking up a batch, in that context, so therefore I become a casual taxable person for that particular state, and I will have to take a registration in that state of Telangana. I'll have to take a registration in that state of Telangana. Now that procedure is important, students, for the casual taxable person. For the normal person, not important, but the casual taxable person, the procedures are important. We'll see that. So am I liable to get myself registered? I cannot say that my turnover is not. So if I say turnover in say Mumbai is say rupees 3 lakhs, and my turnover in say that other state, which is where I'm a casual taxable person, say it is say 2 lakhs. Even though in totality, that is aggregate, my turnover doesn't exceed the threshold limit, because I am a casual taxable person in one of the state, because I am a casual taxable person in one of the state, I become liable for registration. I become what? Liable for registration, and that exactly what they're trying to talk about it. That is what it is, students. Now the next one, students, is about a person receiving supplies on which tax is payable by recipient under the RCM. Person receiving supply, students. So a recipient. So this is for not the supplier, because supplier will not have to pay any GST. This is for the recipient. Now for the purpose of paying the GST liability, I need to get myself registered, students. And that is the reason why, irrespective of my turnover, I may not be registered at all, because my own turnover does not exceed the threshold limit. Doesn't matter. If I am liable in any transaction to pay the GST under the RCM, then under section 24, I am liable to get myself registered. That is what they are trying to say in this case. The next one, students, is about this is an important one, students. Those e-commerce operator who are notified as liable for tax payment under section 95. Who are liable, students, in 95? 95, students, you may be aware of it, students. Who are they? The 95 category in this regard. E-commerce operator of 95. Who are they, students? So they are, in this case, e-commerce operator of 9.5. Who are the e-commerce operator of 9.5? They are specific category. Not all of them are in 9.5. They are highlighted 9.5 case. Because this 9.5 people, they don't have to collect TCS. Remember TCS topic, the previous topic we have discussed. In the previous topic of TCS, tell me, if I'm a 9.5 operator, if I am a 9.5 operator, then am I liable to collect the TCS? And the answer is no. Why? Because 9.5, they themselves are supplier also. They themselves are supplier also. And therefore, 9.5 category of the ECO are not required to collect the TCS. This point we have discussed in the previous chapter. One chart, remember I made you prepare one chart. And in that chart, I told you that if you are a 9.5 category of ECO, then you are not liable to collect the TCS. So who are this person of 9.5? So they are in a transportation service at Ola and Uber. Then the hotel accommodation Oyo. Then the housekeeping service Urban Clap example I gave you. And the last one, students, is the restaurant service. So these are the category, students, which are there in 9.5. So whether these category of ECO, are they liable to get themselves registered? And the answer is they are liable to get themselves registered. Next one, students, is about non-resident taxable person who do not have a fixed place of business in India. Non-resident taxable person who do not have a fixed place of business in India. Is that non-resident person, is he liable to get himself registered? And the answer is yes. Again, he will also be like a casual taxable person only. This person is also like a casual taxable person only, but they are distinguished. So the normal casual taxable person and this non-resident casual taxable person, they are distinguished. Why are distinguished? Because they have filed separate return. In the next topic of return, students, you will come to know that this category of person and this category of person, they file separate returns. In fact, for this category of person, the return is have got very less compliance. They have to do very less compliance as compared to the previous casual taxable person. The compliance is more. So both of them are distinguished in this context. Now, person who are required to deduct TDS under 51, registration is mandatory. Though this registration would be the registration as a tax deductor, possibilities are there that this person would also be a supplier by himself. This government organization, who is the one who is liable to deduct tax under 51? It is the government and government organizations, agency and PSU. So they might also be a supplier. So as a supplier, they will have to take registration under section 22, turnover based. Whereas as a tax deductor, they will have to get registration separately. This point also I've discussed with all of you. This same is also for the TCS guy. The same is also for the TCS person. For the TCS person also, we have got the same provisioning, students, isn't it? And that exactly the point. So this point, students, is also an important one. If you see over here, a person who supplies on behalf of some other taxable person. A person who supplies on behalf of some other taxable person. Now, who is that person who is supplying on behalf of? Be careful, on some other taxable person. That is an agent of some principal, which means that this is the Schedule 1 Para 3 agent. Now, that Schedule 1 Para 3 agent, he does a further supply in his own name. He does a further supply in his own name, which means that this Para 3 agent will be issuing the tax invoice on his own name to the recipient. That is what we have discussed. Now, be careful, they're using the term taxable persona. That is to say, the principle of who this person is an agent, that principal, students, should be a taxable person. Please pay attention. This is a very important word, and students miss out on this particular word itself. What exactly it is? You need to ask this question. What is the question that you need to ask? Whether the principal is taxable person. This is a question that needs to be answered. Whether the principal is a taxable person. And the answer is yes or no, as the case may be. If the answer is yes, then what is the situation? And if the answer is no, what is the situation? So if the principal is a taxable person, students, so in this context, agent registration will go under which section? So agent registration, students, will go under which section? So agent registration, students, in this case will go under section 24. And if this is not the case, then the agent registration will go under section 22. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. This is the game. If your principal is not a taxable person, that is, he is not liable for registration, in such particular case, the agent, which agent? Para 3 agent will have to see registration under 22, turnover based criteria. Whereas if your principal is a taxable person, then this para 3 agent will have to compulsorily register under section 24. Compulsory register under section 24. Is that point clear to all of you? Every one of you? Now just see the next one. Supplier other than notified under 9(5) who supply through an e-commerce operator. Who supply other than e-commerce operator. Now this is talking about the supplier, students. Supplier registration, students. Supplier registration. So here the registration is of whom? Of the supplier who is supplying through the ECO. Now if I am a supplier, students, and I am supplying, say, a product of, I am supplying a goods of, say, rupees 5 lakhs. I am supplying the goods of, say, rupees 5 lakhs. Then am I liable to get myself registered under section 24? Am I liable to get myself registered under section 24? And the answer is yes. You say, but your turnover has not exceeded 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs as the case may be, or 10 lakhs as the case may be. Doesn't matter. It is a compulsory registration. If I am supplying my goods through an ECO, that is it. But there are some exemptions also, students. Be careful. We are just going to see now exemptions as well. Just warning to all of you. Now, what about the e-commerce operator? Every e-commerce operator who is required to collect the TCS under 52. So just the way we discuss about a TDS for a person who is an e-commerce operator and required to deduct the TCS under section 52, will they also be required, students, to get themselves registered? And the answer is yes. So this registration, students, would be a separate registration altogether. This registration, will it be a separate registration, students? This registration will be a separate registration, students, altogether. I hope that all of you are clear with this one in this regard. Now, just have a look over here. Every person supplying OIDAR service from a place outside India to a person in India other than a registered person, non-taxable, isn't it? Non-taxable registered person, a non-taxable resident. So therefore, you know that this in the OIDR service, students, every one of you are aware of this point we have discussed already. In the case of a non-resident who does not have a place of business in India, and if they are providing services or they are doing a supply, then that supply, students, is subject to an RCM. That supply is subject to an RCM. Is there any exception to this particular point? Do we have any exception to this point? Yes. The OIDAR is the only exception where there is no RCM, but the OIDAR supplier, they are the one who will have to make the payment of GST, forward charge mechanism. This point also I have discussed with all of you earlier. The next one, students, is the ISD, input service distributor. So ISD also will have to get themselves separately registered as an ISD. So the way we discussed about the TDS and TCS collector, TDS deductor or the TCS collector, they have to get separate registration irrespective whether they are otherwise registered under the normal category. Same is also the case of the ISD. And ISD also, students, will have to get themselves separately registered irrespective of the fact that they are already registered as a normal supplier, as the normal supplier. Is that clear to all of you, students? And the last one is the notified by the government. Now, students, one point which I just wanted to ask to all of you. In this entire, I think there are total how much? 12 category. In this 12 category, which are those category of the person who are not the supplier? You need to remember it now. You need to remember it. So you now read it out, this 12 category, and identify which category they are not a supplier. Which category students they are not a supplier. Read it out. Students, tonight we will start with ITC. Huh? Timing I'll let you know. So the ITC becomes tonight. So every day you'll have two sessions. One in the morning and one in the evening. I will return this one, students. So if we see, I'll just put a star mark, students. I'll put a star mark, students. The star marks where they are not a supplier. First one is a supplier, students. Person making an interstate supply. So that's a supplier. Second one, students, is also a casual taxable person, is also a supplier. This one is not a supplier. Third one is not a supplier in this context. The fourth one is also e-commerce operator at 9.5. They are themselves also a supplier. In this case, non-resident taxable person who do not have a fixed place of business, they are also supplier. Now, this person is also, this registration is not as a supplier. This registration also not as a supplier, but as a tax deductor. He may be a supplier. For that, he will take registration under 22. This registration is not as a supplier, but as a tax deductor. Therefore, this is also an asterisk mark. Next one, a person who supplies on behalf of some other taxable person. So that is also supplier. Next is a supplier other than the notified under 9.5. This is also a supplier. So this is a tax collector. The registration as a tax collector. Registration as what? As a tax collector. That exactly the point. Person supplying OIDR. That also students is a supplier. The ISD. The registration is as an ISD. Even though you may have a separate registration for a supplier, but here the registration is that of the ISD, not as a supplier, but as an ISD. So all these are the cases of other than supplier. Other than supplier, students. All the star mark which I have done is of the other than supplier. Do take a note of it in your notes also, students. Do capture it in your notes and put a star mark the way I've done it. I hope that all of you are clear with this one now. Everyone, is a point, student. That exactly is the point. These are all the cases of the person other than the supplier of that particular case. If you all are through with this one, students now. If you all are through with this one, students now. let's come down to, students, let's come down to the exemption particular part. Person not liable for registration. So this is the exemption. So this exemption, students, is under section 23. This exemption is under section 23. I'll just put a subsection for the discussion benefit. This is 23.1. This is also 23.1. Rest everything is 23.2. Rest everything, students, is 23.2. Rest everything, students, is 23.2. Now just read the exemption, students, all of you, quickly in 2 minutes time. Are you all through this, students? Or you are reading or read? So, students, now in this case, if you see, first observation I already told you. So, in the first observation I already told you, didn't I told you that? What is the observation? That in the exemption, students, the limit always would be either 10 lakhs or 20 lakhs. 10 lakhs is at 4 SCS or 20 lakhs, which means that the enhanced limit of 40 lakhs will not apply on the exemption. That you should be very clear about it. Okay. And the second one is that the monetary limit, students, of the exemptions are given to you in 23.2. 23.1 doesn't have any monetary limit. This is a prima facie observation that you should have. From this entire reading that I am making you read, the prima facie takeaway is in 23.1 there is no monetary limit. whatever is the monetary limit which we are getting it, whatever is the monetary limit students that we are getting it are from 23(2). That is the point. Anyway, let's have a look students over here. 23(1) students talks about the case where you are not liable to tax for any reason. Why you're not liable to tax? Well, I'm doing only exempt supply, or my liability is not subject to GST. Whatever it be the reason, student. In that case, if I'm not liable to pay the GST, then what is the use of the government that they would want you to get registered? Because unnecessarily, if they make you register, then you will have to end up paying your GST return. You have to keep filing your GST nil return of GST. Unnecessarily compliance burden will be there on that person. So government understand the fact that if a person is not liable to pay the GST at all, then why we should be getting him registered at first place? That is the first one. Now the second 23(1), if you see, is agriculturalist. Now that agriculturalist students should be an individual HUF. It is not for all. This is only for individual HUF. Agriculturist who is an individual HUF and limited to the exemptions. This is limited to what? Supply of the produce that he has done out of the cultivation of land. So he has done the cultivation of land, and from that cultivation, whatever is the produce that he has derived out of the cultivation, for of that produce he is doing the supply. So if this is what this individual HUF agriculturalist is doing, nothing more, then we will say that the exemption under section 23(1) to such agriculturalist, will it be applicable? And the answer is yes. And the answer is yes. Meaning thereby no registration whatsoever for this particular agriculture. Be careful if you say no, sir. What he is doing is that this person, apart from doing this activity, he is also giving the uh, agricultural farm on rent. He's also giving agricultural farm on rent. So in that case, students, the registration exemption under 23(1) will not be applicable, because this is a limited exemption on registration provided if you being an individual HUF, an agriculturalist who is doing a supply of the produce derived from the cultivation of the land. That is it. If anything else that you do for which you are doing a supply, then you will not be eligible for this 23(1) exemption. You will not be eligible for this 23(1) exemption. I hope that all of you are clear with this. The next one that you can see is about 23(2). And what is this 23(2) students in this context? In this regard. So 23(2) person making only reverse charge supply. Obviously, students. So you are only doing reverse charge supply, which means you don't have any liability to pay. If you are doing only reverse charge supply, what does it mean? It means you don't have any liability to pay. And if you don't have any liability to pay, why I should be getting you registered at first place? Unnecessary harassment. Unnecessary harassment, students. Why I should get you registered today at first place? You are doing only a, in this case, reverse charge supply. You will not have any liability. Okay. Now, after this, the next four is important, students. Having understood this one, students. Now, this four, that's the reason why the first do it in two parts. So, this is because in this four, you will have the threshold exemption. Now, please don't read this, students, in isolation. Now, understand one thing. This is how I'm going to take you through, students. Can you see this? If you see over here, students, this two is about the next two is about the interstate supply. The next two, students, is it an interstate supply? And the answer is yes. That exactly the point. Interstate supply. Therefore, this is interstate supply. This is also interstate supply. So can you do one thing, students? And in the previous slide that you have done, there was an interstate supply. So interstate supply, just put this as one, student. Interstate supply will make you liable for registration. That is point number one. But few interstate supply gives you the exemption from registration. So few interstate supply gives you exemption for registration. Which are those few? This is one. So I'm just putting one and one. Why this 1 and 1? So that the correlation can be done. So 1 in that compulsory this point number 1, where mark this as point number 1 over here, and then these two also mark this as point number 1. So these two also, students, mark this as point number 1. Now by doing this, students, now you correlate. So what I told you, general rule, if you do an interstate supply, you are liable for registration. General rule. Is there any exception for such interstate supply? Two exceptions. So these are the two exceptions. Exception number 1, interstate supply of taxable service up to 20 lakhs. Can you see that? 20 lakhs, or I put 2 asterisk. 2 asterisk means or 10 lakhs, depending upon that 4 state. So there are two exceptions in that interstate supply. The first exception is, now this is about, students, is about taxable service. Now this is about what? All taxable service. All services. So whatever is the interstate supply of the services that you are doing, so I'm a supplier of service and I am doing what? Interstate supply of services. But my interstate supply of service doesn't go beyond 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs if I am in that 4 state. Then am I liable for registration? And the answer is no. I am getting, on the contrary, exemption under section. That is for service. Now the next one, students, is about the goods, students, in this case. Can you see that? In this case, the goods. Now, unlike in the case of service where I have said all these taxable service, can I say the same thing for goods? Can I say the same thing for goods? No, it is only one category of goods. Which is that one category? Let's read this one out. Person making interstate taxable supplies of notified handicraft goods and notified handmade goods up to rupees 20 lakhs. So that is only in respect of one category of goods, which is notified handicraft goods or notified handmade goods, as the case may be. So this is the only category which is eligible for that limit of 20 lakhs. That is it, students, in this context. Isn't it? Now the next exemption, students, if you see, that is for the casual taxable person. The next exemption, students, you see, that is for the casual taxable person. Don't you think now this is again correlated? Correlated means a casual taxable person, please write this as point number 2. A casual taxable person is obligated for registration under section 24. But a particular class of casual taxable person is eligible for exemption. Which is that class of casual taxable person which is eligible for exemption? This is a class. Therefore, I'm writing this as point number 2. Therefore, I'm writing this as point number 2, students. What is this point number 2? Casual taxable person making interstate taxable supply of notified handicraft goods and notified handmade goods up to rupees 20 lakhs. So, say for example, students, I make handicraft goods. I'm in Delhi. Now, there is an exhibition in Noida. Noida is in UP. Now, for that exhibition purpose, I am a supplier of handicraft item, and therefore, for that exhibition item, I have to go there in Noida. In that exhibition case, I have done some supplies also. So, therefore, this would be a casual taxable person making an interstate supply. Casual taxable person making an interstate supply in this context. So, therefore, in this regard, students, if that interstate supply value does not go more than rupees 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs, as the case may be, I will not be required for registration at all. That is the point. Now, students, can you see the correlation also? Just now I established the correlation between the mandatory 24 and the exemption 23 too. That correlation I have established by making you write point number 1 there and one over here, then point number 2 there and 2 over here. That correlation I have established. I can also establish the correlation here also, students. If you see for interstate supply, these two are, students, these are the exemption, students. So they are also, students, correlated. They are also correlated, students. This is what? This is qua supply. Qua interstate supply. Correlated with interstate supply. Qua interstate supply, students. In this context, can you see that? This is qua interstate supply. Do you all appreciate this particular part? And this is what, students? Correlation between these two. Qua means in relation to. This is qua handicraft. That is how, students, the things are in this context. That is a correlation. So interstate supply for all the service exempt. Interstate supply for one notified goods exempt. Handicraft item, interstate supply exempt. Handicraft item made by casual taxable person, also it is exempt. Is that point clear to all of you, friends? Everyone, this is the kind of a correlation that you should always bear it. If you are clear with this one, friends, now I take it forward, friends, in this context. One last point is left, friends. See this one. Supply other than notified under section, suppliers other than notified under 9(5) who supply through e-commerce operator. That I told you, friends. E-commerce operator, friends, in this context. So this is point number 3. But be careful. Again, point number 3. Please write point number 3 over here. So I told you that, students, if I'm a supplier and I'm supplying through ECO of a value of 5 lakhs, then am I liable for registration under section 24? Answer is yes. I'm liable for registration under 24. But now comes to this particular exemption part over here in this context. Now I tell you that, look, boss, my value of supply which I have done is only up to rupees 20 lakhs. But and that too, I'm only of service provider. So if I am supplying through ECO a service, any service, if I am supplying through ECO any service, students, and the value of service does not exceed rupees 20 lakhs, the value of service does not exceed rupees 20 lakhs, then in that case, whether the exemption will it be applicable? And the answer is yes. 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs as the case may be. 20 lakhs or 10 lakhs as the case may be. I hope that every one of you are clear with this one now. So service, students, be careful. So this, if I am a supplier, if I through like an Amazon, I am providing my lectures. Amazon is selling my lectures. Amazon is ECU. And total value of sale by Amazon for our entire year is not more than 20 lakhs. Then am I liable for registration? And the answer is no, I will be getting the exemption. But this is again, I'm telling you, for service, supplier of service. But what about for supplier of goods? If he is supplying the goods through ECO of only rupees 5 lakhs or 2 lakhs or 1 lakh or 50,000 only during the entire year, is that supplier, will it be obligated to registration? And the answer is yes. I hope that all of you are clear with this one. All the questions, students, 95% of the question is based on what we have discussed up till now. 95% of the question. And that we will see. And that is what will come for our now presentation part. Having understood this, now the things that comes out is the presentation part. Now, friends, I have already discussed this particular part. Where and by when to apply for registration. I told you about this thing. If you are in 22 or 24, student, then 30 days. But within 30 days, students, you are supposed to get yourself registered. When you are liable for registration within 30 days. But a casual taxable person on a non-resident taxable person, students, they have to take the registration prior. That is at least 5 days prior to the commencement of business. at least 5 days prior to the commencement of business. This is an important one, students. This is an important one in that context. I hope that all of you are clear with this one, students. Every one of you. Why, students? That exactly is the point. Effective date of registration, students, also I have discussed with all of you now. Procedure of registration and all the remaining points in this context, students. Procedure of registration. Read it primarily at your end. Procedure of registration, students. Read it at your end. It will not require my intervention. Cancellation of cancellation or suspension of registration. Read it at your end. It will not require my any particular intervention. Under what circumstances it will be cancelled or it will be suspended. So this is again homework. Procedure of cancellation, the same thing. Revocation of cancellation, same thing. The entire point is about the cancellation part. Fully procedural part, students. That is your homework now. I hope that all of you are clear with this one, students, in this context. So therefore, what is your homework now, students? Procedure of registration is the homework. Thereafter what? I will not take you through theory, students. This, whatever questions are there, I will only now take you through the questions part. Theory, you will now read it. Cancellation of registration and revocation of cancellation. So these are the homework for all of you now. Is that point clear to all of you now? So just read it and keep it ready. So that now tomorrow, students, the morning when I start on this one, students will complete this entire thing, because it's only now I have to give you presentation. One session, I will be done with it. Okay, but just keep this one ready so that there are some 2-3 questions on cancellation. I will be in a position to take you through to those questions directly. And whatever are there, I'll just complete it this case. But in the meantime, read this particular part. Okay, so we're done with the registration tomorrow. Day after tomorrow, returns. Thereafter, invoice. I think that is how we will complete it. And tonight, the meeting at 8 o'clock. For what? For the purpose of the other particular part, which is ITC. See you then, students, for ITC now tonight. Take care.